Welcome to the dialogue session part of the budget special, KiniTV's budget special. My name is Gunasegaram and I'm editor of KiniBiz, which is a business news portal. We have three guests here today to help you get a better feel for the budget. Let me start with the lady first, Tricia Yeoh, who is Chief Operating Officer of Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. She was previously research director at the Selangor Menteri Besar's office, as well as director of the Center for Policy Research at ASLI. Our second guest is Dr. Saifuddin Abdullah, who many of you all will recognize as a politician. He was a former Deputy Education Minister, as well as MP for Temerloh. He now is CEO of the Global Movement of Moderates Foundation. Welcome, Dato.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Bob Key, who is KPMG's Executive Director for Taxation. I think you specialize in transfer pricing.
Correct.
So we will be depending on him to give us some insights, especially into the GST.
Okay.
All right. So let's move straight into the discussion. And I think the main thing that we will be talking about today is the introduction of the the goods and services tax, which has been announced at 6%, and this will be introduced on April 1st, 2015, which is 17 months from now. So let's start with Tricia. I mean, do you think that the introduction of a tax like this would result in an increase in inflationary pressures, although the government is zero rating a lot of essential items, for instance?
I think when the GST bill was first tabled in the first reading, it estimated that there will be an inflation rate of 0.1%, if I'm not mistaken. So now that it's been increased to a 6% rate, I mean, without a doubt, there will be inflation. It's just about how much, what that rate will be. But yes, I think it's important to point out that government has to be very clear about what are the exemptions, what are the both zero rated as well as exempted items on the list. This must be published transparently for everyone, easily accessible for the public, and maybe regularly updated as goods change. And also, I think one thing to point out is that he also should have maybe set a time frame for how long this 6% will be implemented. So for example, when Singapore implemented its GST in 1994 at a lower rate to begin with, they actually said that this will be the case for 5 years, so that the government can't, arbitrarily as and when, okay, next 2 years, I will increase it again and again. So I think that's one of the flaws of a GST, in that government can increase it when it wants to, but in order for public to be a bit more able to plan, yeah, that should have been the case.
Are you in agreement with the implementation of the GST, for instance?
I think in theory, yes, because it simply replaces the existing sales and service tax. I mean, most of the analysts and economists would say that it is a more comprehensive tax regime. It's broad-based. It includes almost all goods and services with some exemptions, and it's much easier for government to record it and to collect it. Maybe our friend here can tell us more. I think when people get angry with government for implementing a tax, which will increase the revenue, it's always because of expenditure. So firstly, the kind of wastage and what you see in the Auditor General's report, that certainly doesn't help. And secondly, the fact that expenditure continues to increase every year on year. So this year's budget is a 5% increase of the announced budget last year. But that's not counting the supplementary budget. So I don't know whether you want to talk about the supplementary budget now, but basically every year, without fail, there's like for 2013 fiscal year, it was 14.1 billion supplementary budget, and that will be the case for the next fiscal year as well. So it's about that, yeah.
As a former member of the government, what are your comments on that?
Well, I think this is a long-awaited announcement. I know there are the pros and cons, but I believe it will be well received, especially by rating agencies and by economists. I think for the last 2 years, I've been attending quite a number of discussions from bankers and analysts, and they were asking me. Their favorite question was, when will Prime Minister Najib? And I was saying maybe after the general election.
And you're right.
And I think I suppose it was not rocket science. Anybody can guess that it's going to be implemented now. But I think Trisha was right when saying that I think to gain public confidence in the new system, not only we need to the timeline, like 6% for how long, but also we want to see. And I think I saw the Prime Minister as Minister of Finance announcing that there will be, culprits, if I may, involved in the AG, in the wastage, will be, action will be taken. That is quite important. And also the lowering of the personal tax and review of the corporate tax, that is also important. But I was waiting for more precise announcement on that the government is going to be more prudent in spending. I think I don't hear that. I was wishing for strong indication that we will be more prudent in our spending.
Yes, that was missing, wasn't it? I mean, what are the specific measures that the government is taking to reduce wastage, cut corruption, and so on? So that was clearly missing. Any reason why do you think that?
I don't know. There are people within the party, me included. We were saying even before GE 13 that we need to come up with some kind of a white line, a departure from what we had in the past, especially in fighting corruption. By prudent spending, I'll give you an example. One is, of course, we need to be more strict in allocation of supplement bills. And when you come to governmental spending, especially in construction under various government agencies, the VOT at the end of the, when you cannot, when you cannot fulfill or when you cannot complete certain project within the stipulated time, and then you have added budget to it, we have to be more strict on that because there's a lot of wastage. But on prudent spending, I think we need to go very strong on spend management technologies like e-bidding technology and e-procurement technologies.
Bob, quickly your comments on the introduction of the GST. Is it something that you think is long overdue? Or?
Yeah, I think it's long overdue. And I think the introduction of GST will definitely put Malaysia at a better forefront in terms of international standing. I think international rating agencies would definitely be very happy with this announcement. In the past, there has been a lot of false starts, and I think the pressure internationally has forced the government to finally make a decision, and making this decision with a firm timeline in terms of its implementation and also specifying what the rate would be. I think that is something that is definitely going to be well received. I think what a lot of public may not be very aware is that this is not really a new tax. I think the PM has made it very clear. It replaces the existing sales tax and service tax, and he has tried to explain it by giving a very simple example about buying a soft drink at a restaurant. A lot of people do not know a soft drink sold in Malaysia would have attracted sales tax, would have attracted service tax because you buy at a restaurant. So these two taxes is going to be abolished. You're only going to pay GST in the future. Right, so it's not necessarily going to lead to an increase in prices. Certain things might not. There is going to be an overall balance. I think the impact on inflation is not going to be very significant. If there is any price increase, it should taper over time. It should be temporarily only. So the education, I think, of this new tax system is very important. The training, the flyers that goes around to the general public to explain to them how this system works is also very, very important.
This concept of value-added tax, see, I mean, if you were to use the bottle drink example, for instance, so it taxes only the value.
Correct. It taxes the value added at each chain. So a very simple example: the manufacturer sells to a distributor, the distributor sells to you and me. We are the final consumer. So how the tax would work is that when the manufacturer sells the particular product to the distributor, the manufacturer will charge the GST at 6%. And when the distributor charges the product to you and me, they will again collect the tax at 6%. But what happens is that the distributor would have paid the 6% on the input that they buy from the manufacturer, so he gets a tax credit for that. And he gets to set it off against the output tax that he collects from the final customers like you and me. So he only pays tax on the differential, which is the value added that he adds on to the product. So this is why it's called a value-added tax system.
Under the previous system, just to be clear, under the previous system, if sales tax applied to a number of goods, then you continue to pay the 10% at every stage.
In the present sales tax system, in my example of the manufacturer selling to the distributor, the manufacturer will charge sales tax at that one single stage, and that's it. The distributor, if it was a restaurant, for example, who sells, and he has to charge service tax, he collects it again at that level. So you get a tax on top of another tax, in a simple example of a beverage. That is why a lot of times you don't see the amount of tax if you are not dealing with the person who is charging the tax. If we eat at a restaurant, because the restaurant is the one charging the tax, we get to see the tax on the bill, but we don't deal with the manufacturing company who the restaurant buys the drink from, so we don't see the sales tax that they have already paid.
If the manufacturer sells to the distributor, does he have, under the current system, does he impose a 10% sales tax?
He would have to.
He would have to.
Yes.
And then the distributor will sell to the consumer. So and he'll impose another 10% sales.
He will have to impose a service tax because he is a taxable establishment selling a taxable item to you. Of course, it's not always the case that there is a sales tax and then there is another service tax. It depends on the type of goods, the type of service, and where you buy your services from. But in that example of the beverage, it will be a very clear-cut case of a sales tax and then another service tax. Yeah. So a lot of these hidden taxes become costs, and the businesses will definitely pass the cost on to the consumer. Consumers would not know how much tax they have paid or how much tax is embedded into the particular item. If you go to a supermarket today, you buy a can of soft drink, you do not know you have paid sales tax on that can of soft drinks, right? So in a GST system, it will be transparent. So the price of the good and then the GST amount would be stated separately, and then the total amount that you have to pay, that will be clearly stated. Okay.
What about transfer pricing? You know, I mean, does it help to reduce transfer pricing and tax evasion?
So that is actually a very good question. Today, a lot of manufacturers that are licensed for sales tax, they plan to minimize their sales tax by setting up intermediary companies, if you like. So when the manufacturer sells to a distributor, they don't sell directly to the distributor. They sell to another marketing company. And by lowering the price from the manufacturing company to the marketing company, they are able to charge lower sales tax. So therefore, they don't have to bill a higher amount of sales tax. So there is a lot of dispute with tax authority as to what the correct price should be to which I levy my sales tax. So that was what the PM was referring to in terms of transfer pricing, because there are a lot of transactions between related parties, and because they are related, they can determine the pricing. Unlike a case whereby I were to deal with a third party, I would sell to him at what the arm's length price would be. But if I set up intermediary companies, which I also own, then I can try and adjust my price in a way. Within certain tolerance, I guess, but tax authorities would often challenge this, and they spend a lot of time auditing companies like that. So by introducing a GST system with an input and output tax basis, you no longer have an incentive to do that, because whatever tax you charge, whatever tax you pay, you get an input and output tax credit. Yeah. So this system is supposed to be more efficient. It's supposed to be self-policing as well, because if I today were to buy any particular product, I want to make sure I buy from a company that is registered for GST. Otherwise, I will not be able to claim back the tax credit, because he cannot issue me a valid tax invoice for me to claim back the tax credit. So it encourages people to come and register themselves. And part of the increase in revenue comes from this self-policing system, because a lot of companies now, you know, under the radar, they choose not to license themselves, they don't charge the tax. But moving forward in the GST regime, they would have to license themselves if they want to issue a valid tax invoice to their customer, to allow their customer to claim a tax credit.
So you are sort of widening the tax net.
You are definitely widening the tax net, definitely, yes. And you're trying to bring in or rope in a lot of people voluntarily through this input and output tax system.
What about outright tax evasion? Does that happen as well in this case?
I think the case of outright tax evasion will be cases of smuggling, probably. I think there are always going to be cases where people will continue to smuggle items and then they will never register themselves. But I think this will probably be limited to high tax items like your cigarettes, your alcohol and things like that, where there are a lot of other taxes apart from your sales tax and service tax, which is abolished, because you still have excise duties, for example, on this kind of SIM products. So those taxes are still going to be quite huge, right? So if companies choose to outright evade, it's because they are smuggling, they don't want to pay any tax, they don't want to declare any tax because of the excise duty element. So that there will still be, but I think it will greatly reduce moving forward. Yeah.
Let's look at, okay, I think Tricia and Saifuddin both have expressed this point of view that you know, the government has got to do its part at the same time in terms of cutting wastage, reducing corruption and so on, you know, when you are imposing the GST. The other part of the imposition of the GST is the cut in income tax rates. And so I think the rate that has been, the proposed rate cut is about 1 to 3%. Yeah. And significantly, the maximum limit is reached now at 400,000 of income per year, compared to 100,000 previously. So this clearly seems to, it looks like those in the higher income tax bracket will actually gain more from the income tax cut than the low income group. Any comments?
Well, I think the increase in bracket from 100 to 400K, that is trying to maybe bring us more aligned with our neighboring countries. Because Singapore's highest tax rate is also applied on a much higher marginal income level. So ours is at 100,000, you hit the top bracket already. So moving to 400,000, yes, I think, yes, you are right. It does help those that are paid more. But at the same time, it will be interesting to wait and see how this 1 to 3% rate is going to be put into effect, whether or not the government is going to try and reduce more at the low income level, whether they are going to widen even the lower income bracket, so that the reduction in tax will benefit more people. It's still, I think, quite early on to be able to determine for sure. It looks like now it would benefit the high income level more so than the low income level. But until the gazettes are out and we see actually the brackets and the reduction in the rates, it will be probably too early to make any comments.
It may be a bit difficult to justify politically, certainly.
Well, you see, this is post GE13, yeah. But I really want to go back to the GST just for a short one. When you look at countries that have just established or just introduced GST, there seems to be always a short period of time where there is a price hike. Yeah. And this is something that I think the government have to be very careful, you know, because first of all, this is something that for some people may not be very popular. I think the education part of it, we really have to be very careful in telling the people and sharing with the people that, as Bob was saying, that this is not, I mean, this is supposed to be a better tax regime, but how do the members of the public will receive it? But I'm not a host, but I wanted to ask Bob, how is it then that there is always, or more often than not, there is this short period of time where there is a price hike during the transition, you know?
I think what happens is a lot of times when they abolish the existing sales tax and service tax, this abolishment of the sales tax and service tax might lead to certain savings for a particular company. But these companies do not pass on the savings to the consumers, right? Because the consumers do not know about the abolishment. They think it's all a new tax. So some businesses might then try to increase price because of the new tax. But over time, because free market, you know, free competition and all, you find that over time you may not be able to sustain that price increase. So you would have to reduce your price eventually. So that's why an inflationary pressure, if any, would be temporary, and it should then go back down to its normal levels. So there have been a lot of cases where in the past, countries that have introduced GST, such as in Australia, for example, what the government did was that the government published certain indices to give public an awareness of how it will impact the price of certain products and services, certain goods and services, so that when they go out to the market post GST, they would not expect to see such a great increase in pricing. And what happens after that is that enforcement is very important. I think the PM mentioned about the domestic trade officers going out to carry out enforcement activity. I think that is very important to make sure that the traders, the businesses selling the goods and services do not unnecessarily increase price above the certain tolerable level, I think.
But nevertheless, the introduction of a 6% tax rate will probably have a one-off effect on
I think so.
One-off spike on inflation.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there were a lot of speculations about what the rate would be, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6. I think the government has chose to implement it at 6. Hopefully, and this goes back to what Tricia was mentioning earlier on, and hopefully this 6% rate, introducing it at a much higher rate, means that the government's intention is to actually maintain that rate for a longer period of time. Because it's always easy to try and have it at a higher rate. I can keep it longer. If I introduce it at 4 and then I realize that, oh, it's not enough, then I have to increase it. Having to increase the rate following the introduction of a new tax, if that's how the public perceives it, will definitely not be well received. So if I were to introduce a new tax, so-called a new tax, I might as well start at a higher rate than the 4 or 5. And if I find then that I can survive without a 6% rate, I can then reduce it to 5. It will be even better received by the public, should the need arise.
If I can just add, from what I understand, when the GST was first introduced in Parliament, the intention was actually not to increase the government revenue. It was to have a more organized and systematic tax collection system, but that was at the 4% rate. So now that it's a 6%, and I think we also were a bit surprised, we thought it would be lower than that, it does mean that is a very clear intention to increase the revenue. So it actually ultimately goes back to like balancing the budget. I mean, if government cannot sustain its expenditure on a yearly basis, then there has to be areas where they have to think of where to cut. And looking at the way the ministries spend right now, I don't think there's going to be that kind of fiscal discipline imposed on that. I mean, given, for example, the Prime Minister's office budget as well is even higher, 16.4 billion for 2013.
Yeah, I think some countries, when they introduce it, some even introduce it at a higher, 10%. Of course, it's a gradual process, but some actually introduce it at a higher, much higher.
But right now it's lower than most all ASEAN countries. I think Singapore is 7%. Singapore and Thailand are 7%. The rest of them are 10%.
10 seems to be the mean.
I think Japan is lower though, at 5%.
But as I said earlier, I think prudent spending on the government side is of utmost importance. And I think this is it's not only the AG report, because there are also other kind of spending that fly below the radar that the AG cannot detect.
Because the AG's report only takes a very small sample.
Exactly. One is sampling, and also there are. I mean, actually it depends on how you allocate. Like prioritizing. How do you prioritize allocation in some of the agencies? We need to improve a lot.
So maybe linked to something else that we will probably talk about is the BRIM, which the Prime Minister announced, right? So I think it is a trend, like globally, that governments move away from income tax to consumption tax, which is what we're doing with the GST. And then when you tax on the consumption, then you're also able to take that money and target it to specific groups. So that's what BRIM is supposed to be about, and now they have even like a higher allocation. But I do want to know how much money is going to be spent on this BRIM 3.0, because in BRIM 2.0 already 60% of the population was eligible to receive that amount. So
I think BRIM 3.0, I think
more than 4 billion.
4.6 billion.
So they say 4.6 billion.
4.6,
So that's a huge expenditure.
But I would be interested to see the debate in the House, because I have heard 1 or 2 MPs from the government side who were of the opinion that we should not prolong this cash aid handouts like BRIM.
I think that was Nur Joslan, wasn't it?
Yes, Nur Joslan to be specific. I know there are one or two others. So I really want to see if Nur Joslan will bring this up in Parliament and see some good discourse on this BRIM story.
But I mean, sorry to interrupt, but that also means that if 60% of Malaysians were eligible to get BRIM 2.0 at below 3,000 ringgit, and now you increase it to 3,000 to 4,000 ringgit, you know, that will be definitely more than 60% of Malaysians.
7.9 million Malaysians will be entitled for the BRIM program. I think that's what the PM said just now. So it's quite a sizable number.
Yep.
But I think most people look at BRIM, or at least the government says it's a temporary measure until the incomes increase. You know? So, well, how temporary it's going to be is anyone's guess now. It might be quite a long while before incomes catch up.
It's hard to take away once you give out, you know.
But we have to rationalize it.
Yeah, true.
So I presume all of you agree that GST is a good measure. The counter is that the government should watch its own spending.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
You know,
a clearer message that we want to fight corruption.
Okay.
Yeah, seriously, more seriously.
Yeah, a more serious message about corruption.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that he didn't say very much about subsidy cutbacks, except for the 34-cent removal of sugar subsidy per kilo.
Yeah.
You know, but when we were looking at the economic report earlier, it indicates there is a 15.6% drop in subsidies for 2014 to 39.4 billion. That's a drop of 7.3 billion from 46.7 billion earlier. So I suppose one can expect that they will be starting to announce some withdrawals of subsidy throughout the year. Anyone?
Well, I think the PM did mention, maybe not in very specific details, about rationalization of the petroleum subsidies and how they want to set up a integrated database to make sure that the subsidies are being received by the people who ought to be receiving it. So I guess some of this reduction probably will come from this rationalization that they are trying to carry out. I'm not sure if they already have the details available in terms of how this rationalization of the petroleum subsidy would work out. But certainly I think that is very important, because otherwise we continue to give out subsidies and then that's when, if you start introducing a new tax and the government is not prudent in its spending, money is not going to the right place and people get more worked up over it.
The database that he talked about was to combine the e-Kase, which is currently under the Welfare Department, and the BRIM I suppose management, so to combine that database. But I think what's also important is to combine database with state governments and also Lembaga Zakat at the local level, which both also give out handouts to help the poor. And from what I know, these databases are not combined, there's no centralization, so somebody who's earning below a certain income can actually be receiving 2 or 3 different handouts, you know.
Yeah, one of the debate every time you talk about BRIM and even Zakat, for instance, is, are the recipient genuinely the people who should be receiving it? And there are instances where people get more than 1 or 2 cash handout, cash aids, and there are also instances where someone who is really worthy of receiving and not receiving, and this goes back to the data.
Yeah, I suppose that's why they are having a registration exercise and trying to computerize the whole thing so that so as to ensure that people will get it.
Computerizing is one thing. How do you put the data in? Where do you collect the data from? I think this we have to scrutinize the system. You can't simply rely on ketua kampung and penghulu, and then politics may come into it, and this is where some people may be sidelined. And
also, especially now, as more and more people get different sources of income from different places, it's very difficult to computerize that.
But I was thinking the other part of subsidy rationalization, which basically means subsidy cuts at the end of the day, call it rationalization, whatever it is, it's a cut. So what about the reduction in taxes? I mean, there wasn't anything which was announced in the budget about, say, cutting prices of cars, for instance, you know. There don't seem to be anything. Any comments? I mean,
I would like to think that with the introduction of GST, that hopefully the prices of cars should come down. Yeah, should come down.
And then you pay only the GST on the car. That's
because the the automotive industry is probably an industry where there is a lot of indirect taxation on that particular industry. So particularly on sales tax and excise duty. I mean, sales tax will be abolished.
And then road tax too, tolls.
Oh yeah.
Toll is an exempted item, right? Toll highways.
Public, yeah.
No, I mean the cost of motoring. You have to pay lots in tolls in this country. You know?
Yeah.
I think ultimately it goes back to the manufacturers of the cars and demand and supply, I guess. If one particular manufacturer find it important for them to lower price as a strategy, because now GST is in place, they are able to want to pass on the savings in tax to their customers. So they start selling their cars at lower prices, then everybody will follow suit, right? But if car prices are maintained, everybody still keeps on selling it at the same price, then I don't think it's going to have an impact.
But what about after ASEAN Free Trade Area? That's supposed to kick in soon, is it? I mean, you can't have differential duties for cars, right?
Correct.
But if you do a free trade arrangement with, under TPPA, is it?
Yes.
Trans-Pacific.
So that TPPA, I mean, if it comes in, yes, I think rationalization of the import duties, that will definitely ease the car prices a bit. The question is whether...
A bit or quite a bit?
I say a bit because, simply because when they reduce import duty, they can always replace it by increasing excise duty. Right, so then when you import, when you import, you pay import duty, you pay excise duty, you pay sales tax, a whole lot of taxes. So if they increase excise duty, then there is not much difference.
But you can't impose excise duty differentially, isn't it?
Yeah, you cannot. You cannot.
So you can't actually protect, right? So if you impose an excise duty, it's got to be uniform on all cars.
Correct. Yeah, but if the government wants to protect the local car industry, they will find mechanisms to, if import duty has to come down, and they have to increase excise duty to protect, but they don't want to burden the local car manufacturers, then they will find some mechanisms of perhaps giving exemptions, for example.
Research grants.
Yeah. I mean, other forms of incentives, tax incentives, for example, double deduction claims, for example, or grants or subsidies, for example, to ease the burden of these taxes. So it's a question of how much they really want to protect the local car industry. If they keep it open, yes, by right, car prices should not be at these levels. You know, Malaysia has one of the highest places where we pay car prices. Our car prices are so high.
So it's mainly cars. Are there any other goods which are steel is the other one?
Yes. Yes.
Steel. Anything else that you can think of?
I think those are the main ones. Yeah.
So
I think
our future tax rationalization will be affected by these two sectors.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next big one, real property gains tax?
Housing.
And housing. Now, I think, let's see, for the first 3 years, the RPGT has been increased to 30%.
30%.
And this used to be 15% for the first 2 years.
correct.
And then for the next 3 to 5 years was...
It used to be 15% for the first 2 years, and then 3 to 5 years it was 10%.
All right.
And after 5 years, there's no tax.
Okay.
So what the government is proposing now is kind of they are doubling the tax to 30%, but they're extending it to the first 3 years.
Yeah.
And then the fourth and fifth year, it'll be 20%.
Fourth year is 20%, and
20,
fifth year is
15%.
15%.
Correct.
6th year is 0.
6 years 0, but 6 years 0 only for individuals. I think for companies, they still pay 5%.
And for foreigners, it's 30% flat right up to 5 years.
Correct. And then after 5 years, it's 5%.
After 5 years, it's 5%.
Correct.
So, well, they seem to have followed conventional wisdom as far as this is concerned to try and cool down the market. Any comments?
No, I think this is important because I've been hearing a lot of complaint, especially from young professionals, that housing prices have been rocketing, I think, for the last 1 year. I know of people buying houses. I mean, first of all, many people can't afford houses, and when they can afford it, it's like saying that I'm lucky that I bought it 3 months ago, because within 3 months, price hike, the price rocketed like 30%, sometimes up to 50%. And I think the government's announcement on building more low-cost houses and medium-cost houses would be welcomed by the public.
They have some specific incentives. I can't remember the details at the moment, but they seem to be quite good incentives for building low-cost houses. But I think the other thing is, which is quite significant, is that the developer interest-bearing scheme is no longer there. So that was a scheme whereby a buyer could pay 5% upfront and then not pay anything until the entire development was completed, which could be up to 3 years later. So it's almost like a leveraged bet on property, isn't it? And so that's off now. So what do you think will be the impact of that? Do you think some of these condominium projects, especially, whether the rate of construction will decrease as a result?
That's possible. I mean, to be honest, I don't know enough about this particular scheme. Maybe others can comment. But if I can just comment about the previous topic about the RPGT.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's good to do it, and it's a return to a previous rate as well. So it's not like it's an entirely new rate. It's good to cool the market. But I think I'm also always suspicious of like significant tax increases because of maybe it comes from my suspicion on what government will actually do with that money that they do collect. If they use that money allocated and allocate it well for low-cost housing, then that's fine. But we don't know for sure, because none of the revenue that's collected is actually marked for any specific purpose. So I'm not sure. But related to that, I think is about the issue of housing as a whole, and whether, as a young person myself and my peers, whether or not owning a house is an imperative for us in the future. I mean, if you look at other developed countries, okay, maybe in Europe it's different, but in those countries, owning a house is not a necessity anymore. Most of the people don't own their homes, they rent it. And maybe we have to think about that in the future, or maybe some sharing scheme between state and the consumer itself. So just something to think about. But maybe back to your
but I think for now, most people, I mean, young or otherwise, I think they still feel that owning a house is something that is quite basic. That's something that's the only property that they would own anyway. But there are people saying that sometimes we also have to make it easier for people to buy a house, as compared to buying a property that would appreciate like a car. So I wonder whether our system now provides or facilitate a young professional. Would it be easier for a young professional to buy a car, to own a car, or to own a house, or to own a property? In that sense, isn't it? Because I think people are looking at a system that facilitate and enable people to own a property, which will be lasting.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, getting rid of the DIBS makes it even harder for genuine home buyers. I mean, the government intention is to try to curb speculation. So then it is assumed by taking out this DIBS that people are using this. I mean, no doubt there will be people taking advantage of these schemes, but I think the original intention of the scheme is to probably make it easier for people to buy and own a house, the genuine home buyers. And also the part about increasing or doubling the existing RPGT rate, is that really going to curb speculation? I mean, it remains to be seen how it would or whether it will. Because if I hear what is in the marketplace, a lot of people who are the speculators, to them, if I make 10,000 profit from selling a property, I have to pay 30% tax now. Well, I just make less than. It's not a big deal, right? So I make 7,000 instead of 10,000 then. But I still make my 7,000. I will still go and speculate. Right?
And so the price will still rocket up.
So you wonder whether or not it would achieve its intended objective. But I guess because a lot of the comments coming from the general public is that it's so difficult because of speculators pushing up house prices. From a tax perspective, I think the government may not have other avenues.
This could be the only thing that they can do.
This is the only thing that they can do. It's like, okay, maybe, well, what can I do? If I don't make it to 30%, do I make it to 50%, for example?
Surely this is not aimed at raising revenue for the government.
I think, yeah.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's actually again facilitating people, or as you say, genuine home buyers.
Yeah, correct. It's really to help out the genuine home buyers, but yeah, how effective it would be. Yeah.
So I think, for instance, what can you actually do to make this a country where people can own their own houses? I mean, that's not easy to do, isn't it? I mean, what can you do? Short of having something like the Housing Development Board in Singapore and controlling the whole thing, I think the government's trying to do that through Prima One. What can you do?
I thought I was listening to Prime Minister announcing some kind of plan, whether it's not necessarily the housing board, but I may not be able to.
The private sector?
I think
it's talking about a My Home scheme for private sector to build low-cost housing
and then medium cost housing. So it's like a proportion, 30% this, 30% that, So I thought that there is some kind of engineering, if you which should be able to help.
I mean, ultimately, it's about incomes, right? Like, if the incomes don't rise in commensurate measure, then there's no way that you can be able to buy a home at that price. So
also, the rise in house prices, if it keeps on rising faster than the
income levels.
Much faster. I mean, I was just thinking about property prices in Singapore and in Hong Kong are so high, but then people still buy. I mean, in Hong Kong, many young people would be renting, but your top 20% would still be able to purchase houses, apartments, tiny sizes at exorbitant rates, but that's because they also earn a lot. Yeah.
Finally, maybe just to sort of wrap up, let's look at some of the macro figures. I think PM was saying that we're on track to become a developed country by 2020, if not earlier. The threshold income for that is US $15,000 per capita, I think. Now the other thing was that the government says it's still aiming for a balanced budget by 2020. In terms of the fiscal deficits, it's on track to keep it at the projected levels. I think which would be 4% in 2014, isn't it?
Yes.
And then on to 0% by 2020.
Originally, last year at least, they announced 4% target in 2013.
2013, sorry.
Yeah, and then 3% in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the figure where the government is very close to exceeding its self-imposed 55% limit of debt to GDP. I think in the economic report shows 54.8% at the moment, and the ceiling is 55%. I mean, does anyone know what this 55 ceiling is about? Is it something in the statute books, or is it a self-imposed?
It's self-imposed, and that rate has also been increased through the years. So originally it was 40-something%, and then it went up to make for I think, if I'm not mistaken, the spending after the 2009 crisis. So 55%, and we're dangerously close to that. So actually on that, I've read a few papers recently about how if we are not careful, we will face the twin deficit.
Twin deficit.
Yeah, where you have the first debt deficit,
the fiscal deficit.
Fiscal deficit and the current account deficit.
Current account, which is the sum total of the trade in goods and services.
Yeah, so we are not there yet, but our current account surplus has fallen in the latest numbers that we have. So
are you all worried about the debt levels?
I think we have reason to worry. Of course, the government will always say, as if I'm not the government, the government will always say that so long as we are able to service the debt, yeah. But any level of high debt is not something that is positive, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, perhaps just to as a final something to relieve our viewers with, perhaps you can just say what you wanted in the budget which wasn't there. For instance, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, I was looking for a stronger signal that the government will be more prudent in spending and will put into place, not actually to put into place because they are already there. I was referring to spend management technologies, yeah, but to actually be more not vocal, to actually make a lot of emphasis that we want to be more prudent, less wastage, or if not go away with wastage. But yeah, I don't see that, and I was hoping for it to be there. Yeah.
Bob?
Well, I guess not so much what's in the budget but I'm hoping that with this introduction of the GST being imminent, that the government machinery is actually ready to help out the general public to understand the tax a lot better, and also the infrastructure within the customs authority is also ready to do up the licensing, the training, the education, and so on. Particularly, how a lot of times now people will try and Google and find information about how GST would work. So the websites of the government should be equipped now with a lot of information to help people understand it better. So I hope that should be available quickly, if not already there, so that people can actually understand the tax better. And I was also suggesting earlier on to some people that the government should start doing road shows now at various locations, shopping malls, for example. Malaysians like to shop over the weekend. Set up some booths or counters, help people understand how the tax will work.
Give them some incentive, otherwise they won't stop in the
So I think as Malaysians, now that the tax is going to come in, if you walk in the shopping mall and you see a booth and then you have GST flyers or brochures and things like that, I'm pretty sure you'll just walk up and take whatever you have to take, ask the relevant questions, try and understand how it will work, ask how it would impact you. You see, yeah, I think that will be really, really useful, and that will be a welcome thing.
Yeah, I think that will probably come. I mean, it still is a year and a half to go. I think I would have liked to see something along the lines of what our Prime Minister actually announced several years ago in the NEM, the new economic model, where, for example, government said that they would increasingly divest its share in the market, in the economy. I don't really see much of that happening, and nothing of it was mentioned in the budget. Okay. So for example, government presence in existing industries through its GLCs, the government-linked companies, the fact that government has a large share of, say, Bursa Malaysia, although, we've achieved that amount, whatever trillion last year, but a lot of it, more than 50% of it actually comes from GLCs. So I would have liked to see an emphasis more on a more opening up of the economy, freeing, lowering the barriers to entry into the market, and also dealing with monopolies, which we know still exist in the economy. And unless you deal with those monopolies, private sector will not be able to compete.
Talking about some announcement about structural changes.
Structural changes would have been good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all very much for attending. That was very helpful, I'm sure, to our viewers. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for staying with us.